One. Welcome again. My name is Enrique Guzman, he, él pronouns. Super excited to be here with every one of you on this Wednesday evening, um, and excited to bring to you all an introduction to race and ethnicity. So, excited to hand this over to our host for the day, Richard Lopez, for some quick introductions.
Thank you so much, Enrique, and welcome all. We're so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us. I want to wish everybody a happy Hispanic Heritage Month. And my name is Richard Lopez. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a DEI practitioner, and I also do supplier diversity work for a company called UKG. We've got a great conversation ahead of you today. We're going to be talking about topics of identity and how they intersect and the complexity of just who we are. When I think about my own identity, the complexity and nuance of being Hispanic, Latina in the United States, and you know, oftentimes we may paint a broad stroke. You know, I'm part of the Hispanic community, and yet if you click down a little further, I'm Mexican American by culture. But for me, the double click down is the identity that I most relate with, and that is being Tejano, being Texican. I'm an 11th generation San Antonio, Texas native, and that has its own history and nuance and stories and food, and that's what I really identify with. And so as we talk today, we think about identities. You know, allow yourself to think about the nuance, the double click of where we're coming from on this. Oftentimes we have to get below the surface to really understand and empathize with the people's experiences. You know, the fact that it's Hispanic Heritage Month, I actually love this time of year because it gives us a platform to have conversations with folks that maybe we wouldn't otherwise. And in particular, I like to talk to people that don't know otherwise. I'm sure many of you on this call will know, but the message I like to share with people around Hispanic Heritage Month is that as Hispanics, as Latino individuals, we're not a monolith. You know, as all of you know, and it always opens an interesting conversation when I tell people that, hey, as Hispanics, we represent many countries and many cultures and dialects, languages, ethnic, racial backgrounds, and this is a message that I think is also important for today's conversation. This idea of nuance, because even within the Latina community, our experience in Latinidad is unique. It's nuanced. We may share the same identity as Hispanic. But the issues, the challenges, the obstacles we face are very different, very unique to us. How they present themselves, how we experience it, and ultimately how we affect change. It may require different strategies based on where we're coming from. So there's a lot we're going to unpack today around these topics. I am super grateful and excited that we have two world-class panelists that you're going to hear from today that will be bringing some very interesting insights and perspectives on these topics. So without further ado, I would like to introduce these two wonderful people that are going to be presenting with me today. I'll first start with Abir Ramadan Shinawi, if you'd like to introduce yourself first.
Good evening, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, wherever you are on this amazing planet. I'm very, very honored to be here. So my name is Abir Ramadan Shinawi. My pronouns are she, her, hiya, which is the Arabic for her. I'm the founder of Altera Education Consulting. So I tell people Chicago raised me, but Baltimore County, Maryland houses me. I'm a proud child of Palestinian immigrants, grew up on the south side of Chicago. So I have a really strong affinity with the Latinx and Hispanic community, given that Chicago has one of the larger Mexican American populations as well, which really has helped shape my affinity for the culture and the people. And talking about identity and intersectionality is really something that we all experience. And I'm excited to talk about how they connect and how we can really dig deeper into that concept. I'm a proud girl mom, 3 daughters. I'm a former social studies and history teacher, which I think is my first and only love. And now through my consulting, I am an advocate for Arab and Muslim students, but for all students, and also do curriculum writing to bring the voices that were never heard when we were in school. And so today, also to honor Hispanic Heritage Month, we do a lot of that as well, because there's so much that we uncover every year. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Abir. And Joshua Abiasar, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes. Thank you, Richard. I would love to. Hi, community. Pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Joshua Besar. Mis pronombres son él y ella. I am Afro-Dominican Caribbean from the Boogie Down Bronx, spending the last 10 years and some change in Colorado, actually. Studied criminal justice, studied anthropology, and now through Lucier Consulting, engage in the mission of how do we create a global community of belonging where regardless of who you are, where you come from, you have the space, the container, let's just say, where you could be and have the access to thrive, right? And being your authentic self. A lot of the practices, right, that we always engage in, while we might learn it from these institutions, are actually based and rooted in a lot of cultural practices. And so within my work, always honoring the lineages of my mentors, elders, and ancestors who have taught me, right, what are the different ways in which we can actually, as my mentor, Kevin John Fong says, be in Pono, right, with right relationship. I would like to say not only with ourselves, right, but then with those greater circles outside of that, right, our community, nature, and beyond. So happy to be here because the life that we live in is intersectional, right? It's in all the shades of gray. And so how can we understand that so we could get a little bit closer, right, to understanding ourselves and the world that we live in?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joshua. We're in for a treat. And we're going to start today with really looking at some content. Let's get some kind of baseline understanding on some of the topics we will cover in our discussion after this. And Abir is our content expert, and will be taking us through some concepts next.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to go back, Richard, for you calling us worldwide experts. I don't think I've ever been called that before, so I'm going to take it. Definitely
Take it, world class. Own it, own it. I'm telling you.
Same. I'm writing that down.
Right. There you go, Joshua. We're going to use that.
Good.
So we're just going to go through some lingo as we say, and I'm going to do very basic level for now, and then we can dig deeper into the conversation, of course. There's a lot of talk, especially about race and ethnicity. And that also comes down to the census and why this is important to understand this. And I will be using myself as an example, but also as an educator, I've come across a lot of students who identify as Latin, and why those intersectionalities are important. So when we talk about race, we should all know by now from everything that's coming out and from the famous book by Ibram Kendi and the version with Jason Reynolds about STAMP, race is really a social construct. It was created in order to create not only the social construct, but also this power structures and who has the power to do what and to whom. And I love the quote, and I'm reading it right now, about how racism started out from the social construct because you're categorizing people based on their skin color, their features, the language that they speak, some of the cultures that they practice, but also a lot of the race that has happened, especially in the United States, is based on skin color. And we know that especially in Latin American communities or even Black communities, that the intersectionals come with also how your skin color itself, and also classifying people, even if it's 1%, if you have Black blood in you, then you're just considered Black. But I think the concept of race historically to justify inequality, because again, according to Ibram Kendi and in the book Stamp, they say a racist idea is any idea that suggests something is wrong or right, superior or inferior, better or worse about a racial group. And that's one of the main reasons why the concept of race was created. So when you have that concept of race, it also puts people in boxes, and it doesn't allow people to grow, but it also doesn't allow other people to look at a certain group of people in a multidimensional fashion. So having the concept of race as a social construct, but also really goes down to power structures. And we're seeing that contemporary impact today as to see why it's important to talk about race and ethnicity and the intersectionalities that come with it. So, for example, I identify as Arab American, but when you go to a census, it's not on there, right? But even you, Richard, you talked about being Tejano and proud, person from Texas. These are all identities that don't fall under race. Therefore, they really constrict anybody's perception of who they are, and then has a dominant culture look at you a lot of times in a deficit mindset. So if we're talking about ethnicity, ethnicity is what I would believe. So I look at it this way: race is really the outer shell, and ethnicity is what's everything that's inside. Because a person can be what we call white passing, but ethnically, they're something totally different, right? And I really believe that ethnicity is where people from the global south and the global majority identify themselves. Because for centuries, our communities have always been based on the connections within our ethnic groups as opposed to the color of our skin. And that's why the concept of knowing that race is a social construct is really what led to this self-hatred, the concept of colorism, all of these anti-Blackness, anti-Afro-Latino, Blackness, anti-Muslim or anti-Arab hatred. All of that comes with the concept that you look a certain way, therefore that's who you are. But I think ethnicity is very strong because it connects people based on cultural factors, religion, language, ancestry. Again, Richard, I'm going to be picking on you, but you went back and you're like 11th generation. That's very powerful, right? But even you still identifying as a Tejano Texan, because that goes back to the fact that the history and the ancestry was because Texas was part of Mexico. It wasn't always part of what is the present United States. So that ethnicity marker is important for you because also regionally, you identify that way as opposed to, say, somebody who's in the north in Chicago who is Mexican American, or people in California who may be Chicano American, or people just call themselves Mexican American. So that piece is extremely important, which unfortunately, when colonialism and imperialism happened, they wanted to strip that away because they knew that was our strength. And they knew that was something that our communities hold on to because we have that lineage and that connection. But also ethnicity is a great way to connect people. When we think about the global majority and then the global south, you can go, for example, to a country on the continent of Africa, and in one particular country, they speak multiple languages from place to place. They have different cultures, same in Central and South America. People may think they all speak Spanish, but you have native indigenous cultures, you have native indigenous languages, and you have the melding of other cultures that had come in as well. So those cultural factors are really important to connect people through ethnicity. And the identity piece, personal connection, evolution, and community. What happens to people when they are strong with their ethnicity, but then they move to a place where they're no longer part of that ethnic group? You know, we see that happen a lot with immigrant communities in the United States, where people are like, well, why do they have their own communities? It's because they have that sense of connection. And they really need that in order for them to really feel like they're connected to a larger group of people. But if people really want to look at it, it really is like the tapestry of anywhere people live. It really develops a rich sense of community, regardless of who you are, where you come from, when people really understand how important ethnicity is to people. And we see that a lot with food, or we see that a lot with all these little months. You know, we have Hispanic Heritage Month and we have Black History Month. Although those are terms to kind of be an inroad into understanding those ethnicities and cultures, it's still surface level. And in order for you to understand that people's ethnicity really sometimes comes first before their race, because the concept of race really never existed in a lot of these communities as well. Colorism, unfortunately, it's really across the board. I don't think it's just in one particular community. I know in my community it happens. I know it happens in a lot of other communities. But again, that goes back to the concept of race. And race was based on color. So your shade really determined where you were in the status of life. And when we look back again at our ancestry, none of that really mattered. You were part of the community, did what you had to do. Everybody was doing what they had to do. There was no sense of colorism. Not to say that they lived in utopia, but that wasn't even part of the equation at the time. So race versus ethnicity, and this is the conversation that people are having a lot right now, especially with the census coming out in a couple of years, with people having to write a box for their race, but even the sublevels for their ethnicity. And again, going back to like Arab Americans, forever they've been considered white, but we never got the privileges of being white. right? Just like some countries in Europe, are they really white, or do they consider themselves white because they're part of that majority and that's where they want to be white adjacent to? So what's important is for race, external appearance and social perception, how the, like Ta-Nehisi Coates said it, between the world and me. Well, how does the world and the outside people see me? And then the social perception, but also how do we internalize that? And then the overlap, some individuals identify with both concepts, ethnicity and race. You may ask people, do people consider themselves all, Latin American, or are they Hispanic? But some people say, no, call me Mexican American, call me Puerto Rican, call me Afro-Latino, right? So it depends how people want to be connected. But majority of the time, our communities really gravitate toward ethnicity because of our own global perspectives, that the diversity that lived within our communities and still live within our communities, how ethnicity really creates the interactions we have with each other, again, linguistically, what we do for culturally, religious-wise, but also ethnicity isn't something that the perception that people have because we're so stuck on race. Well, you don't look Mexican to me, or you don't look Afro-Latino. What does that mean? So when we really stand proud with our ethnicity, I think people tend to have a better sense of digging deeper into the intersectionalities of our communities and why it's so important to honor them, especially when you're in spaces with youth. Because nowadays also youth do a lot more with their identities, with their ethnicity and who they are, as opposed to in the past with just wanting to say what their race is. So the overlap is important. It's not to say if somebody identifies with their race more than ethnicity is better. It really is a personal choice. But for the sake of this conversation, intersectionality, you can't have one. Well, you can't have one without the other, but ethnicity, I would say, overpowers race because there's a deeper connotation and meaning to that as well.
Fascinating, Abir. Thank you. Yeah, looks like you have more to share. Perfect.
Yeah, sure. So, this takes more than just like a one slide about addressing systemic inequality, education, employment, housing, and social. So all of these overlap. And I was thinking about an example of when I was in the classroom. And when I first started teaching, I was a teacher in Waukegan, Illinois. And Waukegan, Illinois at the time had a very large Mexican American population. Just like I said, Chicago has a large Mexican American population. But students were still being perceived as if they were children of immigrants or they didn't have the skill set in order for teachers to really meet their needs. And then I see that as well in some of the classrooms that I've been when I was a teacher, is teachers automatically see a student who is brown and they know that they are from Central or South America, automatically they ding them as being a language learner, or they automatically believe that they aren't worthy of being in advanced classes. So what happens with the systemic inequalities is language becomes a barrier. We look at it as a deficit mindset. Having an accent becomes a barrier as well. People just seeing your name automatically puts you in a category where people are like, oh, that name sounds, a particular group. We don't think they're good for our employment or hiring them as well. We've seen that systemically with housing and the stereotypes that we get about people from Central and South America when it comes to housing. And of course, the social construct of we see where people gravitate in neighborhoods. Unfortunately, I live in a city close to Baltimore City, which was the invention of redlining. And we know how that goes with the social construct and housing and giving access to people. And I think giving access to individuals based on their ethnicity and their race is really dangerous, because those who are the gatekeepers are not going to be giving access to people that look like them, that don't speak like them, don't act like them, etc. Add in the layers and the intersectionalities of language and not understanding the system, all four of these end up becoming deficits for people who come from that particular background. Fostering inclusivity, I think what we need to do is have more of these conversations, but we also need to have people in the conversations with us who need to understand their privilege and how they can go back to their communities and explain the importance of ethnicity and the difference of race and ethnicity in order for them to unpack it and develop different perspectives and experiences because ethnicity is something that people in the global South understand. But then, and especially people from the global majority, where other people who are the dominant cultures don't lean on it. So they need to understand ethnic backgrounds and how that's important, and also how that affects the systemic inequality based on a person's perception of their race and who they think that they are. And I believe for this, the key takeaway, so when we understand the difference between race and ethnicity, I highly recommend people read the book Stamped. If you don't want to read the Ibram Kendi version, I highly recommend reading the Jason Reynolds version, and it's on audiobook, because although it talks about race just in the United States, it really presents the systemic issue of race across the globe, because it was really a blueprint. What happened in Central and South America from the Spanish, what happened in South Africa with the Dutch and the English, what's going on right now in Palestine with the concept of all of the ideologies of one group over another. Wherever you go, the concept of race is pervasive, right? So in order for us to create environments where we are inviting people in to be proud of their identities, I think the best way for us to do that is have these conversations, learn about what it means to be tied to what does it mean to you, Richard, when you say you're Tejano Texican, right? What does it mean that you're 11th generation? Promote empathy, but also understanding, not just empathy. I would like somebody to empathize with me, but I want you to understand me as well. I'm just going to do a couple of ones that address systemic issues. That's the main reason why these conversations are important, but also in order to get to the systemic issues, reducing the stereotypes or even eliminating them by having these environments and these conversations as well. And I just want to point out that when we talk about intersectionalities, a great person to follow also is Dr. Margarita Lila Rosa. She does a great example of the intersectionality of the Latino communities, but also from Spain and Arab and all of those cultures coming together that create a really rich ethnicity and also group, and also their culture.
Fascinating. Abir, thank you so much. I was taking some furious notes over here because I think you've hit on some really important topics. And I look forward to kind of unpacking it a little bit further. So let's make this next part of our conversation here just, free flow. I want to definitely hear your ideas. Feel free to interact with each other as we go through this as well. But I'll start out first, Joshua, with you. I have a question that kind of builds upon, our learning here. We've been talking about, race and ethnicity and colorism. And particularly with colorism, I want to ask you, how does colorism manifest itself from your perspective in the Latina community and other communities of color? And if we think about this from a kind of professional mindset, like how does it compound racial and ethnic disparities in professional spaces?
Thank you for asking that question. What resonates is that it brings in a lot of othering, right? First and foremost. Now, as we said, right, the United States is a very particular place where we're placed in the white, black, or what are you box. Now, us coming here, right, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience, right, when we go from a place where, yes, we were in our cultural bubble, let's just say, and we go to somewhere else where now we might be the only one, right? There's always this fight and this reestablishing, right, of your identity, which after a while, right, we could bring in this racial battle fatigue, right? You get kind of aggressive, right, with the way that you try to stand up or stand in, right, your identity. Now, this is a tricky place, right? Because while personally, right, you're seeing it as no, I'm standing up for my culture, I'm standing up for my identity. I am Dominican, right? That, depending on how it's expressed, can come off with a lot of anti-Blackness, right? Sentiments where you say, not, oh, I'm Dominican as just informing, but you actually. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. And maybe if
Okay.
you could turn your volume up a little bit too, Joshua. I don't know if that's possible, but just a touch.
Awesome. All right. This is good. All right, good. It turns into the othering, right? And those anti-blackness sentiments where we go like this, right? No, I'm not one of those people, right? Because I'm this and I have to do this. Now, within the professional settings, right? As we've heard before, it can translate into that gatekeeping where in our perceived, right? Oh, this person is within this color framework, then we are withholding, right? Because then we do fall into those surface level norms or stories that we're told, right? Of
Mhm.
these people are this, and within our own trying to establish and maintain our relationship, we can kind of fall into that, right? And
Yeah.
so, colorism uh, and that othering is a lot of the ways in which at least I've seen it play out.
Fascinating. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah,
That's got me thinking as well. Abir,
yeah.
as you think about that question, I mean, how have you seen colorism present itself and kind of manifest itself even within the workplace or other spaces?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think Joshua did a great job of bringing in the term othering, because
Hmm.
again, with the concept of colorism, whether it's within our own communities or outside of the community, it has a unfortunately deficit negative mindset of a person of a particular shade is not worthy of either doing the job, or they don't have the look or the perception that we want, that we're looking for, unfortunately. So
Mm.
it's definitely something that is pervasive and something that could really be damaging to whether it's a workplace or even education or what have you, to advance a person who really has the skill sets and just being othered based on their skin shade, which I think is it's a very dangerous concept, because also that leads to, if it's open to just that one particular concept, it really opens the doors to many other concepts as well.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I know, Joshua, you mentioned that that time, the feeling of being the only one, and that is challenging. It's challenging to find ourselves in that position, and yeah, obviously, othering is something that we've seen. So those are great answers, and I would love to kind of maybe think about this also as we think about, again, in professional spaces. Maybe a next question, and Abir, we can start with you. Is, if we think about kind of the intersection of race and ethnicity, both within the Latina community and within communities of color, how does that affect experiences of systemic inequality in professional environments? And this may be with hiring or promotions, workplace inclusion. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think another layer added to the othering is when you go through your life with the concept of being othered, or also looked at based on the color of your skin, a lot of
Mhm.
internalization happens. And I think I know myself and a lot of other my friends, imposter syndrome seeps in, right? So when you have imposter syndrome, you're worthy of getting that job or that promotion better than anybody else. But that's already in your head, and you're thinking, well, maybe it really stops people from advancing in something that they really want to do. That's number one. Number two, even when they try to go for that particular job or that promotion and they don't get it, it's like, okay, see, this is the one main reason why I'm not going to do this again. And then we also don't have the people and sometimes the skills to really want to go in and fight that system. It's such a large system that you're like, well, I can't do it on my own. And if it's just one person after another, it becomes this whole snowball effect, and then you end up with the systems that you have today. So I think the concept of othering and colorism really starts with the person internalizing it, and then it really damages any type of employment that could have such an amazing employee, but they're not going to go for it because, again, they've internalized it, they've got the imposter syndrome, and they probably don't have an environment that's encouraging. Whether they've had some jokes thrown around here and there or something that's never like the elephant in the room, it really doesn't help them because they've been in that environment where they don't feel like they're worthy of it. Although it's not from them, it's just from the environment around them.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's almost like it validates what they may
Yeah,
already be thinking, what they've already internalized.
right,
So
right.
interesting. Yeah. Wow. Joshua, what do you think about that? I'll ask it again, kind of the intersection of race and ethnicity within Latina community. How does that affect experiences of systemic inequality?
I'm really resonating with this imposter syndrome that you brought in, right? And the way that all of the experiences are then internalized, right? We are then caught into this cognitive loop, right, where we don't see anything else, right? And a lot of this also is trauma responses, right? That's being exhibited. And I want to bring in Resma Menakem, because he talks about, right, the somatic level that trauma can hold on to someone. And, he says trauma in a person over time, decontextualized, can look like personality. Trauma in a family, decontextualized over time, can look like family traits. And then trauma in a people, decontextualized over time, can look like culture. And so trauma and experiences, especially when we look at the historical context and we see, right, the lineage, right, of those experiences now within the Latina community, that experience is ongoing, right, for many folks, right? This historical trauma is still current. And while, right, there are a lot of other ethnicities and races throughout the world that have had, right, their historical, right, oppression, obviously. Within the United States, there are a lot of them who, after a certain point of time, were granted whiteness, right? And so within that, then we see that shift. Now, within the Latinx community, bringing it in, right? Are you the white? Are you the black? What are you, right? And that's the question. And within this reestablishing ourselves within setting a container, right, that tries hard to, are you in this box, right? That push and pull is formed through there. That's what's coming up for me right now.
Yeah.
Can I just add something to what I heard Joshua saying? I love the trauma response, and thank you for putting that whole like lineage piece. But I want to make it clear that when we speak about this, and especially for myself, when I talk about imposter syndrome, these aren't necessarily weaknesses in our communities, and these aren't weaknesses in our own ethnicities. These are really centuries of systemic degradation in these communities that really help these imperialistic, colonialistic Western powers advance, because they couldn't do it on their own, right? So again, the enslavement of Africans came here. They knew that Africans had those skills. Coming to mainland North America and South America, they had to lean on the indigenous populations to get what they wanted. So when we talk about this, it's not necessarily for people to feel sorry for us, because we come from centuries of growth. We come from centuries of education. We come from centuries of empires that built themselves. It's just that these systems that came and tore them down to such a basic level that people are still building themselves up. So I don't want people to think they run with it like, yeah, you see, they're never going to be able to do it. That's not it. We do come from very proud communities and contributions. It's just unfortunately the systems and the organizations that have caused it to become the way it is and seeped into the trauma response and the imposter syndrome. So I really wanted to make that clear so we don't run with that deficit mindset.
I love that.
I appreciate.
Yes, please go on, Joshua.
No. Okay. Just real quick, again, appreciation and gratitude, because, right, we do often centralize the conversation, right, on that trauma piece. And it is very important to notice that, yes, there are these traumatic experiences that happened. And throughout history, there are also moments of collective resistance, of collective growth, where even the trauma responses that we can still see in some populations do come from, hey, we had to do this to survive, by echa adelante. And, right, we come from doctors, lawyers, right, kings, queens, and that's also part of the history, right, of the reconnecting that is also essential, right, within this healing journey and understanding, right, of the complexity of how we ended up where we are now.
I really like that clarification too, Joshua, because I think I was, as both of you were speaking, I was thinking about kind of the collective generational trauma that sometimes can be pervasive and how to overcome that. And I was actually, I think it was interesting. You actually up here, you jumped into the question I wanted to ask, is like, how do we overcome a deficit mindset? I mean, are there some, that's a large question, but I wonder, what are your thoughts on how do we, and this is up here, like, what do you think about about that. What's your advice to people to say, hey, how do we overcome that mindset?
Yeah. It's a lot of it. There are many ways. And the very first one is knowing yourself. Nikki Giovanni said it best, and I'm going to butcher it, but she says, and if you don't understand yourself, you're not going to understand anyone around you, right? And it's so true. And if we're not aware of the concept that I do have imposter syndrome, but how can I overcome it? That's one way. You really have to start with yourself and with the community and move on with that, and backwards and forwards. But I think one of the things that I'm doing, Richard, and I'm encouraging a lot of my colleagues, and my colleagues come from, all over different ethnicities and identities. In order for us to beat the system, people are like, well, you got to work with the system in order to beat the system. I'm sometimes of the school of thought that if, they say if they don't invite you to the table, you bring your own chair. I'm making my own table. We really need to run with our energies of creating our own spaces, because when we're around our people, whether just right now being in a community with everyone here, I don't identify as Latin or Hispanic American or Mexican American, but I understand the common struggles. But also for myself, creating my consulting company is my first step in telling the system, you are not going to get me. I'm going to create the space that I want. I know what my people need. Therefore, I'm going to create it in a way that is responsive to them, and also helping other people understand and learn about my people through my own eyes. And I always have a saying, and I think this is something that resonates in all our communities, is we also need to tell our stories. If we do not tell our stories, somebody else will, and they're not going to get it right. I mean, that's my motto all the time. So I think we need to continue to say, okay, we will work with you, but at the same token, we've got the power, we've got the money, we've got the people. Now that we're generations in, let's build our own and make that our legacy, and why it's important for that to continue for the generations to come as well. So I think that's the way I look at it. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that everybody is able to do it, but when those of us who are able to do it, I think that really ends up helping chip away at the system, because then they really start taking you seriously. They don't look at you sideways, and then you overcome some of these internalized aspects that you yourself are like, no, I'm not doing that to myself anymore. Enough with the trauma. I'm moving on, and I'm making these healthy decisions and choices.
I love that. Those are very practical. And even selfishly, I'm like, oh, I'm taking notes for me on this one for sure. And I love the concept of telling our story. And that it kind of goes back to what I was mentioning earlier with, the nuanced identity that I have that's hidden or can be invisible. It's like, if I don't tell the story, it's not going to be told, and that's something I try to impart to my children as well. Is, pride comes from, the practice of being courageous to share, that aspect of yourself.
I love what you folks are bringing in, and definitely centering that slowing down, right? That mindfulness. We could have, right, thousands of years of knowledge on the history of racism, and if we don't slow down enough to see how that sits in their bodies, to see how that's tied into that lineage, right, that spirit part of it, and sits in our heart, then how can we effectively embody the work, the practices that we're trying to do? Just like you said, right, it's the process of knowing thyself in a container, in a country where we are socialized not to, right, where we see that slowing down as inefficient, ineffective, as a waste, right? And the world is already, keep it PG, hella fast, right? And our minds can only process at such a speed. And so in that slowing down, we can become more cognizant of, okay, how is it sitting in? How am I then expressing ourselves? And then what's my story with that, right? The fastest way to connect with someone is through our stories. And while our experiences are very, very unique to our own, right? We are the ones going through it. We are part of a collective, right? We're part of a myriad, right? A global community of other people who have, regardless if it's not the same experience, the same loss, right? Grief, wanting access to be, right? Whether that's a little bit more authentic, wanting access to food, right? To community. And through the sharing of our stories, right? We've been in this space together, meeting for the first time for not that long, and yet we could see the interconnectedness, right, and that intersectionality. And there's power in that, especially at a day and age where we are moving a bit more away from the life or death uh, reactions, right, that were in place where our ancestors, elders, and mentors, right, were in, where they told their story.
Yeah.
So that rediscovering of that power and using that to make those critical connections. And that's to end it there. Um, I believe a strategy, right, in going against these systems of oppression, right? It's a very efficient way of separating folks, right? And as we've seen, it's been in a process for hundreds of years. If we want to leave it there, right, we could turn the dial back even more. And while it has been a very effective process, the solution can be hard and very simple as well, right? Within the sharing of the story, what are the processes and the ways and the containers where we can critically connect, right? Feel safe and powerful enough to do so. And if the systems, right, aren't there, we can make our own. Again, we've come from peoples, right, who build systems, build ways that have lasted a few thousand years, right, on that. And so,
Say it, Joshua.
yeah,
Yes.
Yes. So good. And you said something, Joshua, there about around building our own systems. And I know Beer talked about, creating your own table, right? As I think about kind of the shift, we talked about, also Beer taught us about the power dynamics of race and how it was built all around power structures. As we think about corporations, companies, where we're trying to put, we want to foster inclusion and belonging, but we have to take into account these power structures. Like, can you share some best practices? And I'll start maybe with you, Abir, around, what are some strategies organizations might be thinking about, taking into account some of the conversation we've had today?
So I think about this a lot because, Joshua, I love everything that you said because it's so true, and especially about the slowing down. And the reason why us being proud of our ethnicities is because it brings a layer that a lot of people may not be familiar with. And the reason why I think about it a lot is how did we become part of a culture and society that doesn't slow down, but also we don't get to know each other, right? And I'm not talking about we have to be lovey-dovey, but again, we come from communities where you take the time to get to know the person. And I think some of the strategies that these big corporations can do if they want to foster inclusivity and being, a community, there's no other way than just having those conversations, which a lot of people think, well, it's very puritanical. We don't ask about this or we don't talk about that. That's the piece that needs to be worked on. We need to really dig deeper and understand where our employees are coming from in order for us to know how we respond to them. Not everything is a cookie cutter, one size fits all. And again, going back to my teaching days, I mean, that's what you call the least restrictive environment if you're in special education, but also culturally responsive teaching isn't something that you do necessarily. It's something that you weave in. We have to be these weavers of how are we going to bring in, Joshua's intersectionality along with your lived experience, Richard, to make this company a richer experience for everyone and create these products that are going to be a hell of a lot better than just using that one basic element that we have. So I think if we really go back to basics of how our communities functioned, and if these corporations and companies wanted to lean in on that a little bit more, I believe it would go a long way, and it would mean a lot more when they're saying they're being inclusive and they want to be diverse as well. You can't be performative and then expect people to show up for you in their authentic self when you're not allowing them to be their authentic self. So you have to provide the spaces and the understanding and environment for that to happen.
That's fantastic. I totally agree with you on that. Joshua, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, as you think about what you've seen other organizations do, like what works well, what strategies can we do to build to really, get the best, maximize the people that we have around us?
I appreciate that. And I like to bring in the conversation of how do we create the container, right, of belonging, right? We could say it like that. Within the spaces that I'm in, I like to bring in some somatic practices where one helps us, right, slow down, helps regulate their nervous system, in addition to community agreements, right? And these agreements are universal agreements that are, we could say, a compilation, right, of different cultural practices, whether that's no fixing, and never cheer a leader, speak a truth and respect the truth of others. And within this container, right, we can go from here, me versus you, let's get this done, and then we go to us working effectively on how to solve the problem. We have been right in meetings, right, where maybe the first half hour is spent on arguing or trying to get to the first start. If we spend at least 5 minutes, right, two, somatic practice, three, these are the community agreements that we're gonna abide by, right? Universal ones, not deeply specific or right. This is like the golden rule, for example, things that we're already used to. We create that foundation, right? Where then we could cohesively move towards the discussion that we're bringing in, and also accounting for whatever different opinions that we have, right? Because again, within this container, then we have the understanding of, okay, this person said something that is probably a little bit misaligned, but how can I call them in, right? Because I have to speak my truth and respect the truth of others, right? And within that container, we create the practice and the literacy, right? To then be more efficient, be more effective, and I would say we see each other's humanity, right? All institutions, brick and mortar, are also made up of people.
Yeah.
The CEO, the CFO, they have to take off their jackets, right? When they go home. She has to take off her shoes and relax. And so everybody has that want and need, right? And how do we center that collective need and desire to, right, to communicate, to belong, to be in the right relationship so that we could effectively address whatever subject topic that we're going to approach.
Oh my goodness, there's so much in there. So many good things. I was like, I wanted to jump in, but I didn't want to interrupt. It's fantastic. And I'm actually glad, Joshua, you brought up this idea of somatic practices. For those in the audience, we're actually going to have an opportunity to learn more about that. And we're going to have a very unique closing in just a few minutes where Joshua will get an opportunity to walk us through what that means to him and how we can apply it in our lives. But we have about 5 minutes before we do that exercise at the end here. And so I want to ask one final question. I mentioned in my intro that I like Hispanic Heritage Month because it's an opportunity to share a message. And that is, as Hispanics, as Latina community, we're not a monolith. And it's encouraging those, in my network to go, what's one thing you can learn different, that you don't know about an aspect of our culture. So let me ask both of you, if there was one message you could share this Hispanic Heritage Month with somebody, a theme, a message, an idea, what would be your one idea that you'd like to share with the group here? And Abir, if you'd like to go first, I'll put you on the spot.
Oh, sure. No worries. That's a great question. So I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a history person. I'm a history geek. Like I live, eat, breathe it. I think the one thing I would tell people is be proud of your lineage and your history. Celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. Let's use that as an example. Oh my God, the tapestry and the rich history of everything that's happened just on this, country alone. I think people need to know their history, need to read their history and understand it, and to be proud of that, whether it's in their curriculum or textbook or not. I really think people should seek their own knowledge in order to understand who their people are, where they come from, and the importance that they brought to this earth. I know that sounds very utopian and, la, but it's true. We all have contributions that we've given and that are continuing legacy. So I would say definitely be proud of your lineage, learn more about it. And the more you learn, the prouder you become of everything that your culture exemplifies. So that's what I would say.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Joshua, what about you?
Oof. If I could condense it down, I would say be brave enough to be curious and vulnerable. Within that curiosity and the vulnerability, it creates the space for a plethora and a multitude of other opportunities, right? Where we are that in that spot of, oh, this is not gonna go, this is not gonna be curious
Yes.
on saying what if it does? Be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I'm also stressed. Can we take a collective second? Or I don't know, tell me more, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I love that. I think curiosity is something so important. Kind of breaks us free of that rigid mindset. When I look at the most inclusive leaders that I've had the opportunity to work for, it's those that remain curious that have been the most impactful, because they don't know everything, and they're willing to admit that. I think so often in our culture we can be, fake it till you make it. But people are smart around us and they see through that. You know what I mean? So I love this, being curious. Yeah, this is great stuff. So with our last several minutes, I do want to pass the mic to Joshua. We've got a very, as I mentioned, unique ending to this conversation, which has been phenomenal. Thank you both so much. Joshua, tell us what you want us to learn today.
Definitely. Thank you for allowing me to take up the space within that. And I want to engage us in a short thematic practice. This was taught to me by my mentor, Kevin John Fong at the Kahakali Institute. And it was the only piece of information during a Disrupting White Supremacy workshop that was impactful, not because of the 5 minutes, but because there was that opportunity to slow down, which then caused a big ripple effect. And I bring it into all the spaces that I do and always stand by it because it saved my life in a lot of ways. It helped me start that homeostasis, right, of what is going on and what can I do. And when we are in that portion of our existence, when we're asking ourselves, what can we do? One of the most important things is to slow down and work on reconnecting. And so I open and close my spaces within that, in addition to poetry and a few other elements. And so I will close this out with that, if I may.
Yes, and right before you do that, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
do you find that you're practicing or applying this in work scenarios, before and after meetings? Like, how often are you using something like this?
I work on using it as often as I can, not only personally before I engage, but also before my meetings, right? I
Okay.
do a lot of client interactions also through Zoom, and I'm always like, hey, before we dive in, can we just take a moment and do this practice? That creates, right, not only that cognitive dissonance, but also that curiosity on, oh, I could be a bit more myself, right? I thought this was just business, right? It's something else. And
I
so
love it.
before meetings, at the end of meetings, is a good way to transition us in, right, from whatever hecticness we're coming in, and also helping us in transitioning out into the spaces that we're in. Because while we do slow work within this space, we live in a really fast world. And so it creates, again, that literacy and that practice.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, please lead us through it.
Beautiful. Thank you. And so if you have the ability to just liberate your hands and just create some friction, now listen to your body in regards to how this feels comfortable for you. I will count us down from 3. And when I do so, you'll place one hand over your heart, the other over your stomach. It doesn't matter which one, whatever feels right to you. 3, 2, 1. Placing one hand over our heart, the other over our stomach. You could close your eyes or find a soft resting gaze as it feels comfortable, safe, and accessible for you. Breathing in through your nose, into your belly, before exhaling out of your nose again. Making your exhale last 2 counts longer than your in-breath. Making your breathing slow and sustained. Making any adjustments needed to your body. Giving yourself the grace and permission to breathe and be. The next breath, acknowledging yourself, the wisdom that you hold and bring into the spaces. Your ability to show up regardless of any barriers, virtual, physical, or otherwise. The next breath, acknowledging those in the space with us today, the wisdom, the medicine, a reminder of the interconnectedness that exists between the you and I, and how the medicine exists within us and between us. Always acknowledging the first peoples of all the lands that we sit on today, people, animal people, the stewards and the caretakers. Acknowledging our place within, not without. And as we breathe slowly, collectively, I'll bring in some beautiful words by Victoria Safford called The Gates of Hope. Our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope, a different, sometimes lonely place, the place of truth-telling about your own soul, first of all, and its condition, the place of resistance and defiance, the piece of ground from which you see the world, both as it is and as it could be, as it will be, the place from which you glimpse not only struggle, but joy in the struggle. And we stand there, beckoning and calling, telling people what we are seeing and asking people what they see. You take a deep, beautiful breath, and when it feels right to you, let it out. Drop your arms, open up your eyes as you come back into the space as it feels right, giving any movements necessary. Thank you.
Wow, that was so powerful. Thank you, Joshua. I'm gonna have to watch that one again. I felt like I was hugging myself, and I wanna relive the words you were saying. That was really beautiful. What was the name of the poem that you read at the end, or that you recited at the end?
The Gates of Hope by Victoria Safford.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much. This has been just a very enlightening conversation for me. I'm hoping that it was for the audience as well. I want to thank Prospanica and the Center for Social Justice for bringing us together for tonight's event. I want to open it to Enrique to kind of give us some closing thoughts.
Excellent, everyone. Richard, you took my words. At the end, I felt that I was embracing myself for a few minutes. Such a good moment to reflect. And, I'm very inspired by what was shared today and from my end during this Hispanic Heritage Month as I truly, truly reflect on our culture and traditions and the things that really, really unify us. I'm going to challenge myself. I am going to embrace, yes, the culture and the traditions and the good things from it, but also through a growth mindset, truly, truly analyze like some of the things that might not be so great from the past that truly mold our perspectives and mold how we think about things. So that is my goal, and I hope that others can join me with that goal for these next few weeks as we celebrate everyone and our culture and our foods. And I am ready to go eat some. I think I'm gonna have some pupusas tonight. So I
Ooh.
am super excited. So a quick highlight. I do want to share that next month on the 23rd, we are excited to bring to everyone an introduction to immigration and intersectionality. We have two amazing panelists that are going to not only talk about the immigration process, but the psychological safety and just all those components associated to um, just being in especially in the US as an immigrant. So I am hoping that you all can join us that day. Please follow us on Instagram. You have the QR code here on your screen. Please take a quick picture at it. Follow us on Instagram because that is where we're highlighting all of the Prospanica Center for Social Justice webinars, and including other national programs, our Latina track as well. So huge shout out to them too. From the bottom of my heart, Joshua, Abir, thank you so much for your time today as now our world class panelists.
Hmm.
Richard, again,
Yeah.
thank you so much for moderating. You do such an excellent job. So,
Thank you.
from my end, I will close. I will close the session today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all very much. Take care
Thank
now.
you. Thank you,
Adios.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Cuídense.
Okay.
Adiós.
Good night.
Hasta
Goodbye.
luego. Adiós.